most days in a theater, an auditorium that really was kind of a movie theater located in the Student Union building on campus. At night, they did show movies in there, but during the day, they wheeled a large screen television up on the stage, and whoever happened to be in the auditorium was welcome to vote on what to watch, what channel to turn it to from 1 hour to the next. So what would you imagine college students wanted to watch every day while they sat and ate their lunch? And this theater was jam-packed with students, by the way. Did this crowd of bright future engineers and lawyers and leaders of industry vote to watch something enlightening and educational and edifying? Did they want to catch up on the news, the latest events of the day? No way. Someone said it. It was soap operas. Overwhelmingly, it would have been a riot if anyone had suggested something else. So we would sit there, and as a crowd, at the appointed time, we would join together and right along with the TV announcer. And if you know these words, feel free to join in. Like the sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. Yeah. And we would ooh and ah and laugh and talk back to the television. It was a total hoot, a great communal experience. And those soap operas were so corny and over the top melodramatic, but we loved them. Now, I believe one reason the Bible has endured through the years, and it continues to be the world's best-selling book the last time I checked, is not because anyone's forced to read it, but because it contains beautiful spiritual insight and inspiration, examples of both how everyday people and remarkable heroes make God's love real. And quite often, those insights, inspiration, and examples come to us in the form of rip-roaring tales of action, adventure, and over-the-top melodrama that's really fun. In other words, good old-fashioned storytelling. Far too often, I think we can take the joy out of hearing these tales by assuming that, well, this is church, and because it's in the Bible, and it has to do with religion after all, we must always be very, very serious about all of this. Now, it's true, many things in the Bible are pretty serious, but it's also true that the Bible is not a single book. It is a rich library full of books containing a wide variety of types of literature. So many Bible stories are wild and crazy, and they were meant to be entertaining, to evoke laughter and applause, booing when the villain shows up, cheering when the hero triumphs. Wildly exaggerated facts and figures to prove a point. It's storytelling, pure and simple, and we should absolutely regard it as a lot of fun. And if we look closely, we just might see God at work in that tale. It's why Bible stories are turned into major hit movies and TV spectacles. Producers like Cecil B. DeMille were not making biblical epics like Samson and Delilah and the Ten Commandments and King of Kings to elevate public morality. They made those big budget flashy movies because they made large profits and because they told hugely entertaining stories from time beyond memory. It's human nature that we're drawn to, and we remember and we want to hear again the stories that are the most dramatic, the stories that capture our imagination, that make us laugh and cry, tales of conquest and love. And on top of that, the best stories are often told to explain why we do certain things the way something came to be. That's why the Bible is filled with engaging and fun stories, because stories are what we're drawn to. Stories are what we need. Think about what happens right here. Leading up to and on Christmas Eve, we gather together to share and sing music we love and to hear a story that we have probably heard 1,000 times. Doesn't matter one bit that we've heard that story of angels and shepherds and wise men before. We want to hear it again and again. So stories matter in and of themselves. We tell them and we retell them because they contain spiritual insight and inspiration, heroes and everyday people who embody God's loving intention, and they can even explain, not in a real historical way, but in a legendary way, how things came about. One such Bible story that is not very well known is the tale of Esther. And here's some Bible trivia you can pull out when you need it. There are only two books in the entire Bible that do not explicitly contain the name of God. One is the Song of Songs. The other is, anybody? Esther. Esther. So pull that out whenever there's a dull moment at a dinner party and you'll be the star. Now, sit back and let me share with you the amazing story of Esther, a work of fiction from the Bible. By the way, that's really all this sermon is going to be. So just telling one story. So if you're visiting with us today, just know this is a bit unusual. Once upon a time, about 480 years before the birth of Christ, in Persia, modern-day Iran, in the capital city of Susa, it was the third year of the reign of the Persian king Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus was the most powerful human being on the planet. The Persian Empire was enormous and at its very peak, having just defeated the mighty Babylonian Empire. And the king's word was law. He lived like a god in human form. Now, at that time, Jews were living in captivity in Persia, mostly because the Babylonians had defeated Israel decades before, and what had been Babylonian territory and property now belonged to the Persians, including the Jews, living in exile, trying their best to maintain their cultural and religious identity and cohesiveness. They were far away from home, being held as virtual prisoners in a foreign land. So life for the Jews could be hard and dangerous. They were definitely second-class citizens, often persecuted. This story makes it crystal clear that violent anti-Semitism is nothing new. In that setting, King Ahasuerus decides to hold a lavish banquet lasting 180 days, initially for his court and dignitaries, and after that, a 7-day banquet for every inhabitant there in the capital city. Now, here's where the story gets kind of racy, so hold on to your hats. On the 7th day of that banquet, Ahasuerus orders his queen, whose name was Vashti, to display her beauty before the assembled guests by coming out in front of everyone wearing only her crown and a smile. That's right. So, okay, Ahasuerus is clearly a control freak, weirdo, misogynist, but he is the king. And in those days, when you're the conqueror of the known world, the most powerful man on the planet, you can get away with that kind of thing. But to her credit, Vashti refuses to be put on display like that, and who can blame her? That makes Ahasuerus furious. And on the advice of his counselors, you tell him, this is not a good look for you, Ahasuerus, if you want to retain power. He removes Vashti from her position as queen. And get this, he claims he does this to set an example to all the other women who might be bold enough to disobey their husbands. I know. And he issues a decree that every man should rule in his own house. What a guy. So he got publicly embarrassed by his queen because she refused to be publicly embarrassed. And he behaves like a king-sized tyrant. Already, this is a soap opera. Ahasuerus is not exactly the greatest role model in history, but believe it or not, he's not the villain of this story, although the hissing I heard was well-deserved. Since Vashti is no longer the queen, Ahasuerus makes arrangements to choose a brand new queen from a selection of the most beautiful young women from throughout the empire. Think of Ahasuerus as sort of a golden bachelor of the ancient Near East. By the way, the Persian Empire was roughly the size of North America, so he had a lot of candidates to choose from. Among those women is a Jewish orphan whose name is Esther, who was raised by her cousin, whose name was Mordecai, who is quite a bit older and raising Esther more or less like his own daughter. Mordecai is an all-around great guy. The story goes, Esther is gorgeous. So Ahasuerus is smitten by her beauty, and he crowns her as his new queen. But she's conflicted. She does not reveal to him that she is Jewish. Remember, the Jews were a conquered people and not considered socially or ethnically equal to the Persians, and at the same time, though, being into the world's empire, that's a pretty nice gig. So Esther takes her chances and keeps quiet about the whole being Jewish thing. Hopefully, Ahasuerus will never find out. If he does, it might cause him much royal embarrassment, and who knows what might happen. We've already seen how he can act out inappropriately. And not long afterward, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, Mordecai discovers a plot by two members of the royal court to assassinate Ahasuerus. In the nick of time, Mordecai gets word to Ahasuerus. The conspirators are apprehended and executed, and Mordecai's loyal service to the king is recorded in the official book of records. Do not forget that important detail, the book of records. Then Ahasuerus appoints a man named Haman to be his viceroy, his second in command. Ahasuerus is not aware of the fact that Haman is very devious and duplicitous. He's the villain of this tale. One day, Haman is parading through the city being all that, and he passes by Mordecai, Esther's elder cousin. So the custom is when a big wig like Haman shows up, you bow to him. But Mordecai refuses to bow. Mordecai is a Jew, and bowing is a form of worship, and Jews do not believe in worshiping another human being. So Mordecai promptly lands on Haman's enemy list. To make matters worse, Haman discovers that Mordecai refused to bow because of his religious beliefs. In revenge, the wicked Haman vows to kill not just Mordecai, but every Jew living in the empire. Haman gets the king's permission to execute this plan by telling him that there's a certain type of people living in the kingdom who refuse to honor and be loyal to the king. It's total baloney, of course, but he tells the king these people, they don't keep the king's laws, they have odd customs, and they're very dangerous. So the empire would be better off if they were gone. And by gone, Haman secretly means if they were dead. Ahasuerus agrees that he can't be having an insurrection by any group without knowing all the details. He tells Haman to take care of the problem, just deal with it. And so to determine the date this genocide will take place, Haman casts lots. In other words, he throws dice, which in the ancient world was apparently a pretty common way of making really big decisions. In Hebrew, the casting of lots is called Purim. And that's a word you'll want to remember. The date the dice reveals to Haman is the 14th of the month of Adar, basically the month of March on our calendar. And so a royal decree goes out throughout the kingdom to kill all the Jews on that date and to plunder their property. When Mordecai discovers the plot, he's aghast and he's frantic. He knows that all the Jews in Persia will be murdered and that there's only one person in the world who can stop this slaughter, the king. Fortunately, Mordecai's young cousin is the queen. So he begs Esther to intercede. Normally, you think that'd be easy enough, but the law in ancient Persia is that you just can't make an appointment with the king, even if you are the queen. And if you just wander into the king's presence like you're a door-to-door salesman or something without him first summoning you, it's a crime that's punishable by death. And it does not matter who you are. Esther tells Mordecai all of this, that she would be risking her life to go see the king. Mordecai tells her that he knows this. Then he says something else. Who knows? Maybe you are put into this position to be queen for just such a time as this. Now, I don't want to give anything away. But that's the whole point of this story in a nutshell. So gathering her courage, Esther goes to King Ahasuerus, knowing it could mean her death. Miraculously, he decides not to punish her. And he asked her and said, "What's up?" And then Esther unspools her plan. She suggests Ahasuerus throw a dinner party and asks the king to invite Haman. Now, this was no ordinary dinner party, but an opulent feast. And the next night, another feast. Haman, for his part, well, he's now feeling pretty good, pretty secure about his power, about his influence with the king, and now even with the queen. At the same time, Haman just cannot get over this incident where, in his mind, Mordecai has offended him grievously. So he decides Mordecai deserves special punishment when the time comes to murder all the Jews. Haman decides to build this enormous gallows in his own front yard on which to hang Mordecai, with construction starting immediately. A gallows so tall it could be seen from anywhere in the city. A gallows about as tall as the Chrysler Building in New York, by the way. But on that very night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. And what do you do when you can't sleep? Sometimes it helps to read something really, really boring, like one of my sermons. So he has his old papers brought to him, his book of records. Remember the book of records? In his late night reading, he's reminded that Mordecai once saved him from assassination, and he thinks, I've got to do something to repay and honor this man. But I never got to recognize him. What should I do? At that very moment, Haman comes to tell the king of his plans to have Mordecai executed, but the king interrupts him. The king, referring to Mordecai, but not naming him, says to Haman, what do you think I should do for a man I wish to honor? Haman thinks the king must surely be referring to him. So he says, well, if I were you, your majesty, I would dress that man in the king's own royal robes, put him on the finest horse, and have him ride through the city. Yeah, ride through the city while a servant is leading his horse and reading a proclamation out loud saying, thus shall it be done for the man the king wishes to honor. The king says, that's an outstanding idea. The man I wish to honor is Mordecai. And you, Haman, will be the one leading his horse around town and making the proclamation. So Haman is mortified. He's humiliated. He leads his sworn enemy, Mordecai, the very man he intends to hang, around the city, proclaiming that Mordecai is the king's favorite. But that night, Haman still has a dinner date with the king and queen. It lasts for 2 whole days. Lots of eating, lots of drinking going on. King Ahasuerus is in a very expansive mood. He's had a lot to drink. And Esther is oh so beautiful. Under the influence, he tells her that she can have whatever she wants, even half of his kingdom. It's a very big kingdom, basically all the property west of the Mississippi. Esther then speaks, knowing what she says next could mean her own death. She says, I am a Jew, and I want to live. And I want my people to live, to not be annihilated on the 14th of Adar. The king is enraged. He knew nothing about the details of Haman's plan. He says, who has presumed to do this? And Esther points to Haman and says, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. King can't believe it, and he storms out of the room in a rage to collect his thoughts. And Haman knows that he is in very deep trouble. And he rushes to Esther to beg and plead for his own life. But as he does, he falls onto the couch where Esther is reclining at that moment. And then a moment later, the king comes back into the room. From where the king stands, from his perspective, it looks very much like Haman as well, taking advantage of his queen. Also at that moment, conveniently enough, one of the servants in that room just happens to look out the window of the palace and points. The servant says, look, there are the gallows that Haman has built to hang Mordecai on. What do you know about that? The king looks at the gallows, looks over at Haman, looks back at the servant, pointing to Haman and then to the gallows. The king says, hang him on that. And that's what happens. Told you it was melodramatic, but that's not all. The king gives Esther and Mordecai all of Haman's property, but there's one big problem. Remember, the order has already gone out throughout the empire that on the 14th, all the Jews are going to be killed. And even though he's the king, interestingly enough, Persian law, Ahasuerus cannot rescind a royal decree. What to do? Esther and Mordecai suggest the only way to prevent this Holocaust, because that's what it is for the king to issue another edict. This one allowing the Jews to defend themselves against attack by any means possible. So Mordecai writes the order himself, and the decree goes out to every corner of the empire. And instead of the utter annihilation of the Jews on the 14th, they are saved. Mordecai and Esther become national heroes. Mordecai becomes the king's right-hand man. It was decreed to be remembered for all time as a celebration, and Esther names the holiday Purim after the lots that the wicked Haman had cast to plan that date. And to this day, Jews everywhere celebrate Purim, usually in late March. It's billed as the most fun-filled, action-packed day on the Jewish calendar. It's the day of service to others. People also dress up in costumes, put on fun plays. There's somewhat like variety shows called spiels. You're wondering where that word originates. So if that's not one crazy, over-the-top story, I really don't know what is. Yeah. Now you may be asking, what's the moral of this story? Esther is revered for her smarts, for her beauty, for her cleverness, and mostly for her bravery to risk her own life so that her people would be saved from extinction. An everyday person who becomes a hero for understanding that she was put in a position to do remarkable good against pure evil, but doing good takes courage. It's not hard to imagine that tale being told around a campfire, or as a thrilling bedtime story, or today as a soap opera. Now, the name of God may not be mentioned explicitly in this Bible tale, but if we listen closely, we see the presence of God at work in Mordecai, who's unwilling to give up his principles to bow down and worship a man. And we can certainly see the presence of God at work in Esther, who's willing to sacrifice her own life to save the lives of others. Mostly, though, I see the presence of God in the gift of a great story itself. Because stories bring us together. They contain spiritual insight and inspiration and examples of heroes and everyday people like you and me who embody God's loving intention. Sharing stories is also just a lot of fun. And I believe God created us for joy. Right here with each other, that should always be our story. Amen.